Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the June meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for the City of Franklin. I'll start out with a roll call vote and check. So Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Present.
And Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Present.
And Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Present.
And the chair is here also. Second item on the agenda is approval of minutes. Hope everyone's had a chance to look at those. Any corrections, deletions? If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
Motion to accept the minutes, sir.
Proper motion to a second. Let's do a roll call vote on that. Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes on that. All right, new business, discussion of fiscal year 2022 audit planning. Christine, I'm going to let you lead that all for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I welcome to the committee. And we certainly appreciate this committee for the last several months has served as a heavy lifting budget committee, and we do appreciate that role very much. But today we're going to turn our focus to a different role of this committee, which is you also serve as our audit committee. And that was something that you will certainly be serving as an audit committee later this calendar year. And we have a couple of members who your very first Budget and Finance Committee meeting was after Thanksgiving last year, and you actually started in your role as members of the Audit Committee by hearing about our financial results. But this is actually a little bit in the accounting world, at least in Tennessee. We'll describe this as we're getting ready to have our Christmas season, our end of the year, because all cities and counties in the state of Tennessee have June 30 end dates, and July 1st starts our new fiscal year, as well as the state of Tennessee. And certainly, we are getting ready to enter that period. We've been preparing for it for quite a while. Our comptroller, Mike Lowe, and his staff lead that effort for the citywide to prepare for year end. But we wanted to, this year, as we begin this process, invite our lead auditor, Jennifer Madernock with Crossland to come in, and she's going to talk about the role of the audit and the audit process, what Crossland as our external auditor will be doing. Certainly it is a time-consuming process, but it's thorough, and there's certainly a meaning to an audit process. In Tennessee, this is a financial audit, but it's also an audit of internal controls. And so it's not simply an audit of the finance department. It truly is a citywide audit that all of our departments have roles to play in that. And so it is important, and we do satisfy state requirements. We satisfy our requirements from our bondholders who own our bonds. The rating agencies take this very seriously. They review our audit every year. As soon as it's done, I start working with our rating agency representatives of what it means, and it's also looked at by it's a very widely, while it may seem widely very technical, it is widely used. So, and certainly this is the document that we end with, but there's a lot more to it than simply what becomes what's written on paper. So I'd like to invite Jennifer to just walk through what we have upcoming over the next 4 to 5 months.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I'm going to go over our audit approach and plan for the 22 fiscal year, and I do have a booklet which I laid in front of you that has some of these communications within. I will summarize what's in there. If you have any questions while I'm going through, feel free to speak up and ask, or I can take questions at the end too on anything you may have on our approach. Our audit strategy starts with the audit principal, who's me. I'm the one who is signing your report. I lead the direction of the team through all phases of the audit, from the planning phase, which is starting now, through issuance and filing of these reports with the state and the federal government. Our strategy includes several areas. We do focus on higher areas of risk or concern. So this could be anything that may be technically difficult, something where we have had audit adjustments in the past, or if there's any concerns from management or even from you all, if you have any areas that you may have concern on, we will focus on these areas. We also have certain areas that the audit standards say we have to focus on. Those include any revenue streams. Those have been identified as a fraud risk, so we are required to look at your revenue streams during our audit, and we do look at all of those, and there's quite a few, as I'm sure you're aware. We consider inherent risk within the city. Inherent risk is the susceptibility of your financial statements to error or fraud. So we do look at that, what areas may be more susceptible to that. And we look at your control environment. We gain an understanding of the internal controls, and we do test certain internal controls for the city. Those include cash receipts that aids us in the revenue testing, cash disbursements, and we also spend quite a bit of time in payroll. That's because with the pension, there's also a lot of census testing that we do as well. So the payroll people are very aware of who we are. We also consider your computers and the environment of your computer systems. If they aren't processing the information right, it's not going to process the reports correctly, and they may affect the numbers. So we do gain an understanding of how your computer systems work. We talk to IT. We talk to them about firewalls and any areas where they may have any concern for breach. We perform our audit under government auditing standards. We also refer to that as the Yellow Book. That is a requirement of the state of Tennessee for all municipalities in the state. We also do a uniform guidance audit. That's your federal grants. Your federal grants exceed $750,000, so we test those every year. And we have a risk assessment that we're required to do that is how we select what grants or programs that we are testing. Last year, we tested your federal transit program, your highway planning, and also the SCOTA loans. We tested those as well. So we look at quite a bit of the grant funding. We also consult with management during the year. Anytime they have a question, they call me and we will talk about it, which is very helpful for our audit planning. And once we get in the field, if we have knowledge of events that are occurring, it's very helpful to learn about those during the year. We gain an understanding of the city's operations. As a continuing auditor, I do have some historical knowledge of things that have happened within the city over the past 10 or so years. We also discuss with management during our planning procedures any big events that occurred during the year, like bond issuances or any changes in utility rates or property tax rates or anything, or how the sales tax are doing during the year, which I understand is doing very well. We also take a look at the operating environment and the internal control structure. Certain things that would be important, is there any changes in management during the year that can sometimes affect internal control, which can affect operating results? So we look at a whole host of things. Our audit approach is tailored to the city. We don't have a standard audit that we do for each city. It's always tailored to the city, to what your concerns are and what our concerns are for your financial statements to ensure that they are materially stated. We have a little flow chart here, which kind of summarizes what I just talked about. We do test controls and we do rely on some controls. And because of that, we are able to reduce some of our substantive testing. A good example of that is the property taxes. We don't detail test those. We do confirm the rolls with the county, and we look at the rate that are approved by the board every year. Also, the sales taxes, we confirm those, which in the shared taxes, we can confirm those as well. So our audit is broken down into 3 phases. The first phase is the planning phase. We are going to do an interim field work in July, and this is where primarily most of the planning will occur. We'll hold an entrance conference with management and to discuss many of the things that I communicated, test internal controls, update our understanding of controls, look at any new agreements or bond issuance or anything like that that occurred during the year. We apply preliminary analytical procedures. We're looking at current year results and we compare it to prior year as well as to budget and discuss any major variances. We conduct fraud risk interviews, and the board is included on that. So one of my staff may reach out to one of you to ask you about fraud and if you're aware of any or if you have any concerns. So if that happens, that's perfectly normal and is part of our testing. Phase 2 is our substantive procedures. That'll occur in September. We're out here for about 3 weeks. That's where we're doing our detailed testing. And during that testing, we also do our uniform guidance and compliance testing. If anything comes up during that, we do communicate that with management, and then they can do their due diligence and look into what we found to make sure that we have all the facts and circumstances. Sometimes we don't have all the information, so it doesn't, whatever we find may not be a finding, or if they agree with us that something turned out, then that we would report that as a finding in our report, which occurs in phase 3. Also, phase 2, we do discuss any audit adjustments, which at least the past 2 years, maybe 3, we haven't had any audit adjustments. So the records have been very clean. They're ready for us when we show up first day, which is awesome. Reporting and communication, management prepares the ACFR and provides it to us, and I review it. I detail review the entire thing. It also goes through what we call a proof and clerical, and that's where our staff look at it and make sure everything's spelled correctly and everything foots and ticks and ties. And then we have a second partner technical review, which is done by David Hunt. He's been with the firm for approximately 35 years. He does a second review on it to make sure that everything looks in order too, so just put some second eyes on it. We also give our final journal entries to management and discuss any findings that we may or may not have. And then reporting to y'all is also part of that, and that happens in December. So I'll see you again around Christmas or right after Thanksgiving time. So it's about a 6-month process. Our areas of audit significance are listed here. I won't go through those in detail, but we cover quite a bit during our testing, both looking at control evaluation or doing substantive testing on those balances. The customer service team is listed here. I mentioned myself as first partner and David Hunt as a technical reviewer. JD Cage is the audit supervisor. He is returning from last year's audit, and he will manage the day-to-day audit. Between the two of us, we'll be out in the field quite often. Jacob Smith is the audit senior. He's new to the team this year. He just started with us a few months ago. He worked with us 10 years ago, and he's back with us and excited to jump back into the audit world. So, and then Victoria Burgess is an audit staff. So that'll be our customer service team. Independence. We have several sets of rules that we must follow in order to maintain independence with the city. These are under the AICPA as well as the Yellow Book, and we are independent with respect to the city. We do an annual analysis where we do a questionnaire and look at all our clients to make sure that we are independent, and we are. Our timeline, as I just summarized, is listed on the bottom of page 9. And then there's some changes in accounting and auditing standards that are coming up. Some of them are significant. I've been discussing these with management for several years. They're on top of it. They really are. So you guys don't need to worry about any of these being implemented because they're way ahead of even me on getting these implemented. The big one for 22 is going to be GASB 87 for leases. All the Prior to GASB 87, there was two types of leases. There was the operating leases, which were booked on the cash basis primarily. As you made your lease payment, they'd be expensed and it would reduce your cash. And there was also a capital lease, which would result in a capital asset that was being depreciated, as well as a liability on the books that would be reduced. And there was a related interest expense as those payments are made. Under GASB 87, everything's going to be a capital lease. So for every lease that is over a year and is material, and I say material in that if you have a copier lease, that's probably not going to be something I would worry about. It's the time benefit thing there. And management does have a lease policy, which I reviewed and looks really good. So you guys are in good shape for that. There'll also be some additional disclosures in your footnotes related to those leases, and I'll point those out when I'm here in December. The rest of these will be implemented in the years to come, and they won't have as big of a effect on the financial statements as this lease one. But a year ago, we went through quite a few of these with management, and they're already on top of getting these implemented, so you're in good shape. Part of our fraud discussion, fraud, as you remember the Enron scandal, fraud became a big deal for auditors around 2001 when that was occurring. Under the audit standards, we're required to ask certain things about fraud of certain individuals, employees, management, the board. We also do certain testing. We test journal entries. We look at revenue, that sort of thing. So we are cognizant of fraud. If there is fraud occurring, we do want to know about it, and we do take it seriously. The process, if we become aware, if we discover it, we bring it to management and discuss it with them, and we also would report it to y'all. If they bring it to us, same process, and most of the time you're already aware of it because they've already reported it to you, but it would be the same process. So just so you're aware. And the state of Tennessee also has certain guidelines for reporting a fraud, which the city has always followed. So it would be included in the financial statements as a finding in the back. Any questions? Army?
Hey, Jennifer, did you mention the dates you will be here? I know Clyde may have asked earlier. And one thing I was going to add to that is the steps that we do internally. We actually will make sure that inventory counts happen before the end of the year. We'll make sure cash counts happen before the end of the year. If this, also we'll make sure that there is a related party questionnaire, and we send that to leadership team as well as to members of the board. So you will actually receive that electronically. And then, according to state law, we actually will close the books on August 31st. So it used to be you had more time, but they said it needs to be closed within 60 days. And then shortly thereafter, at the next meeting of the Budget Finance Committee, we'll give you the preliminary results, which of course Jennifer and her team will come and audit.
Mm-hmm. And they do. They send me the trial balance on August 31st.
Any questions? Anyone? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Appreciate you having me here. If any questions come up, you're welcome to contact me. We welcome communication with the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Let's go to item 3, consideration of procurement award to InfoSyn, Inc. of Anaheim, California, in the total estimated annual amount of $192,551.40 for utility bill, paper printing, mailing, and coordinating electronic presentation, image archival, retrieval, email, and related services for a term of award for the Revenue Management Division of the Administrative Department Purchasing Order Procurement Solicitation Number 2022-005, $175,000, budgeted in 110-85540-41310 for fiscal year 2022, contract number 2022.
I didn't write it that, I'm sorry.
Dash.
I'm not gonna
I don't-
name names.
yeah,
I'm not gonna name names,
I
but I didn't
don't
write
think the person who wrote it is present.
Oh, I think he might be.
All right.
Our esteemed purchasing.
I could never have written it so thoroughly.
Any questions?
Any questions?
I missed that last number. What was that?
Okay, all right. Sorry, I thought we were waiting on questions. So we are excited to recommend this contract with InfoSend. We started this process back at the beginning of the year to look for a new bill print provider who could also do the email, the e-bills, the electronic billing, and also provide the image archival and retrieval part of this is for our customers who have online accounts with us to be able to view their bill and their bill history as well. And so we had a lot of good bids and responses to that solicitation, but InfoSend was the one that came out on top with the committee. They offer everything that we need and most of what we wanted as well. They had already had a lot of municipal and utility district customers. So they're very familiar with this type of billing. And they've been in business for 26 years, and they had a lot of features that staff felt was useful to us as city employees and also to the customers. And actually it does mention, the budget information in here, but they're actually coming in under what we're paying our current bill print provider, who we've had a wonderful relationship with. They are based out of Clarksville, a small company, and it's a family-owned business, and they're getting ready to enjoy retirement. So the timing of all of this worked out well, since they are getting ready to shut things down and enjoy the next phase of their life. We were going to have to be looking for a new provider anyway, so.
So, InfoSend is not moving to Tennessee then?
Well,
That's
they've not indicated as such, but
Okay.
I can't say
They're
that
from California.
for
they
certain.
might know.
City out of California.
They certainly could be. They have 4 locations in the United States, and actually their Dallas office is the one that will be servicing our needs most of the time. But the beauty of it is because they have 3 other locations, if for some reason they need to, use their Indiana office for 1 month, it's seamless for us. We won't really know which office it's coming out of, but.
Do we need a vote on that? Okay, let's
Yes,
do that
please.
then. Are there any questions?
There's a lot to this.
If there's no questions, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve and send it to the full board.
Motion to recommend, excuse me.
That's proper motion. Is there a second?
Second?
Let's do a roll call vote on that. Then Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Okay, let's go then to item 4, consideration of resolution 20-22-27, a resolution adopting an uncollectible accounts receivable write-off policy for the city of Franklin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I do want to thank Jessica for being up here to help me with this item. And on this item, it actually is a review that we do every year about looking at our existing financial policies and determining if there are any that would be helpful if they existed. And as we did this review this year, we took a closer look at outstanding non-court receivables that we have sent to collections. In compliance with accounting standards, any that are in this status we do properly record them as uncollectible. But the one thing is about them being on the books, if someone's reading our financial statements, it gives the impression that they will be collected. So what we thought we would do is, and it's actually the attachment to this item, is we actually looked on June 9th just to see the status of utility service receivables. And on that schedule, and I don't know if we can change over to that schedule,
The last
Yeah.
attachment.
is we actually looked at those that are in delinquency level 8 just to see what it told us. And when you look at that, we actually see that this represents 20% of the accounts that are outstanding showing on our books. It represents 30% of the amounts that are outstanding. And we look to see since January how much of these have actually been collected, and the answer is $940 in total, or essentially 0% of the collections. What this policy would do is it would allow staff to look at the $1 billion of receivables in this category and use the criterion in this proposed policy to determine if it would be appropriate to write off these accounts. And I might just list some of the criteria that we have in the policy. The debt may be in dispute. The debt may be that further collection would exceed the potential recovery. We can't locate the debtor. The debtor has no assets. The debtor has passed away. The debtor is a company no longer in business. The debt is legally discharged. The amount may be under $5 and remains unpaid after a year. The amount remains unpaid either after 6 or 10 years, depending on legal judgments, and the amount is past the statute of limitations of collections, or for some of the oldest receivables, has 15 years passed. So what we anticipate, if we do a review, we'd like to see how many of these receivables meet these criteria. And if we determine which ones those are, is depending on the amount we're requesting, possibly the CFO, the city administrator, or if it's more than 25,000, actually having the board be able to approve those accounts to be written off. And basically that way it wouldn't still be on the books, but with that impression that they would be collected. And,
So if it's over 25,000, meets any of those criteria, city administrator would be able to write that off?
No,
If it's
under
under
25.
I'm sorry, under
Meets the
25.
criteria,
Yeah.
you could.
Yeah.
Any one of those?
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
And-
Now, I
and-
would likely, I would likely report that like I do other actions under the threshold to you as actions taken on behalf of the board. We'll talk a little bit about that a little later in this agenda, but that's one mechanism. And then as Mike said, the larger ones would come to the board with the same description of if it met some or multiple criteria.
So who sends that out to the collection agency? Do we do that?
That comes from our office. Well,
Okay.
the utility billing is the vast majority of these. There could be other receivables from other departments that could be covered under the write-off policy, but all of the delinquent and outstanding utility bills come from the revenue management office.
Do you have a sense of how old some of these are?
That's what we would be doing as part of the
Yeah.
review.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, this is over an extensive period of
It
time.
is.
This is,
Yeah, some of them
It
could be
is.
very old.
yeah.
It is.
Because I don't believe we've done this, any
No.
kind of cleanup.
No.
I've been here 13 and a half years. I've never
Exactly.
seen us do it.
Yeah.
And I suspect it's many years ahead of that, too,
Yeah.
that we have not
Yeah.
had gone through these type of review.
Yeah.
So you don't think Marshall did that?
I'm guessing maybe not.
What's the, what is the trigger for collection agency eligible?
So.
What triggers them from being eligible for that
Sure.
service to getting the service?
So these receivable statuses come from our software system, and they're not necessarily the best descriptions to actually understanding what they really mean. So, but something important to point out, what might help you understand it, is if it falls in levels 1 through 4, that's our active accounts. And so we don't turn over active accounts. You have an account with us, we turn your water off if you don't pay, but we don't send you to collections. Levels 5 through 8 are our inactive accounts, so they've been terminated. And then we go through some steps, send them the final bill. If they don't pay that after 60 days, they get a penalty added. They get a letter and a notice letting them know that they're 60 days behind on their final bill. And then if another 60 days goes by and they still haven't paid, then that's when they could be sent to collections. So I suppose that could be that collection agency eligible terminology you're seeing there. We also send out automated calls about 3 to 5 days before we do that, and we actually have a staff member in the office who just calls customers as well. So most of the time, these efforts, if we're going to collect on it, these efforts result in payment. But if not, then it does go to the collection agency. But a lot of the times, by the time it gets to that point, they're nowhere to be found. If it's a business, it's closed. Maybe they've passed away, something like that. So those are sort of a high-level description of the steps we take before it gets to that point.
So follow-up question on that. On the level 8 sent to collection agency, these are active, this 1.054, that's active with the collection agency, or it is inactive, or both?
Well, we hope that they are actively trying to find them. It's an inactive account with the city, so they don't have an active water or sewer account. But we've turned it over to the collection agency with as much information as we have available, and then at that point, we're asking them to try to track down this person or this business and collect payment. And we do get a statement from them every month. You know, if they collected anything on any of the accounts we've turned over, they send us a monthly itemization of that, and we get that money monthly. So, I mean, we know that they are working those, and we do get some payments, but as you can see, it's a small amount.
But they are still being worked, is what that's showing on level 8, though?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Mike, do you have anything that
Yeah,
you want to
just
add?
maybe two other things that are in the policy. It actually ensures that due diligence on any account being recommended for write-off has occurred in documentation. And if there is staff, the city administrator or the CFO who has approved write-offs, there actually is a formal reporting at least annually to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen.
Any other questions? Eric, you, Christine?
I will mention, just for a point of information, that it is in this document, but we did work with the law department, with our city law director on this policy, and this does not include city court. And so city court, you know, as our law director gave advisement, that has a whole different set of rules on what has to happen. And so this, as Jessica was describing, these are primarily utility accounts, but just that you do know, it's not outstanding tickets or items that have come through city court. That's a whole different type of process.
If we do not have any other questions, I'll entertain a motion to approve this and send it to the full board.
I'll make a motion to approve item number 4 to send to the full board.
Proper motion, a second, and let's do a roll call vote. Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Let's go to item 5 then, consideration of ordinance 2022-20, an ordinance to increase from 25,000 to 50,000 the threshold over which public advertisement and sealed competitive bids or proposals are required for non-emergency, non-proprietary purchases. Who has leaded that? Brian, you, okay, all right.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Brian Wilcox, Purchasing Manager for the city. Staff recommends the Board of Mayor and Aldermen consider an increase to the dollar amounts of the various purchasing thresholds now in effect as permitted by Tennessee law. Because the dollar amount required for public advertisement and competitive bidding is established in the city's municipal code, section 5-502, because it's in the city code, an ordinance is required to amend that provision. The Tennessee legislature recently amended by 22 Public Chapter 1016 a section of TCA 12.3.12.12 and permits now certain local governments to increase to an amount not to exceed $50,000, the threshold over which public advertisement and sealed competitive bids or proposals are required for non-emergency, non-proprietary purchases. And the city of Franklin is one of the eligible local governments. What makes us eligible, by the way, is that we have a full-time purchasing staff and that we centralize the purchasing function. So for the following reasons, staff recommends the Board of Mayor and Aldermen approve this change. There are four. The first is that while sealed bids and proposals is one means of establishing pricing, it is a more cumbersome process and therefore may preclude obtaining best pricing as soon as possible. Reason number two for the staff recommendation is raising the sealed bid threshold would increase the spectrum of purchases that may be handled without the need for a formal procurement process. So for example, we have a requisition for something where there's only one supplier available. Now with this higher threshold, we can approve that administratively if it's under the threshold. So raising the threshold gives the staff a little bit more flexibility. Reason number three is, and I apologize, in your memo there's a typo, but the dollar amount required for public advertisement was last adjusted on November 23rd of 2010, not 2020, and was effective July 1 of 2011. So that's 12 years ago when it was adopted and 11 years ago when it 11 years ago when it became effective. And so the purchasing power of the dollar has been reduced by inflation over that time. Maybe most recently, especially. And reason number four is raising the sealed bid threshold would allow city staff to focus more of our attention on higher valued purchases, thereby allowing for increased efficiency and effectiveness of the purchasing function. I want to be sure to note that in addition to the sealed bid threshold, this ordinance would have the effect of raising the three-quote threshold because that threshold is a percentage of the sealed bid threshold. Currently, that threshold is $10,000. So anything above $10,000 up to $25,000 currently may be satisfied by three quotes. The new threshold for three quotes would be $20,000. So anything between $20,000 and $50,000 could be satisfied by three quotes, should the board approve this ordinance. And that change to the three quote threshold would be simultaneous to the sealed bid threshold change. So staff recommends that ordinance 2022-20 be recommended for approval by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. Thank you.
Any questions of Brian?
Anything, so on anything under 20,000 would not require three quotes? Is there tracking, does that still flow to the purchasing department? And is there tracking of those? I don't know, if you get, we're all of a sudden getting pencils for, $6, we've been getting them for $3. And what, I mean, is there any tracking of that? Just because that is raising that 3-quote option or 3-quote requirement. And I'm sure it's similar to what it, I mean, the controls are in place now, but it just raises that up a little bit higher. I mean, so we're not starting to pay, have some sort of, favoritism or something, and pricing goes up inadvertently.
Well, there are guidelines against favoritism
Well,
separately, but I think your question is perfectly appropriate for the general public to understand that our policy expects the departments to use good judgment when they're making purchases. So the purchasing policy lays that out. It puts the burden of responsibility squarely on the shoulders of the individual departments to make prudent decisions that protect the best interests of the city, regardless of the dollar amount. Secondly, I would say that the finance department and the purchasing office from time to time review aggregated data. And so we're looking for opportunities to discover that a product or service has been purchased by more than one department, for example, and that over the course of a year or spread across the organization, there is an opportunity for, and maybe even the legal requirement, to get competitive pricing, whether it's 3 quotes or a sealed process, or other tools in our toolkit that meet the purchasing policy. I think it's a 2-pronged answer, at least. Those are the 2 answers that occur to me off the top of my head. Good question.
Does the city administrator have any concerns going from 10 to 20 and all, unforeseen impacts?
Yeah, I really don't. We're really mirroring what we did, as Brian referenced, 11, 12 years ago, because that's when the state provided some additional flexibility or latitude on these amounts. We do have the same level of accountability in terms of following purchasing policy, getting help. The aggregation is both a safeguard that we're getting the best value we can, but also, are we thinking smart about how we go out into the market and get those services, as opposed to multiple departments doing? Can we do it in one unified effort? And so there is some analysis that happens on a pretty regular basis. Brian and his team also do review outstanding contracts and agreements that we have to make sure we're following up on those and keeping those both current, and that we're appropriately going back out to get pricing, whether it's through a formal process or a informal quotes or whatever the right step is given the procurement. So, in any of these, there's a level of trust and responsibility we place at the departmental level. I think we think about where the best use of our time and effort is, and adjusting that dollar amount up, make sure that we're spending our time where there's the greatest value, and also providing an opportunity to streamline the process of getting our needs met through maybe a quicker process that still delivers a good value to the community. So it's always a balancing act. If you wanted to overcompensate, you'd bid everything, but then you wouldn't get nearly as much done. But you also, if you went the other direction, then you would miss the opportunity to get a value of going into the marketplace and really having people compete. So I think this provides us with a good balance, and it's a guideline that we use and we report to you as we are exercising the responsibility you've given us. And as you've seen with responsibility you've given the city administrator, that's reported to you on a regular basis, so you can see what's being done on your behalf, and always open to questions on that, and the public gets to see how we're using that authority too. You do, but so does the general public too. So I think we've got a good amount of safeguards in place, and the policy makes sense.
And if I may just add on, because I do think this is an excellent question, is that I believe part of why the state allows only certain cities to have this option is because of the importance of a full-time purchasing office. Because something that I recognize on a daily basis as I support the purchasing office is that they are a resource. And it's not simply that they're a resource on something that technically falls into, these particular buckets of whether they're managing a procurement for you, is we do have full-time staff that advise. And so we have a lot of questions. Brian, of course, certainly is experienced in this profession, but we also have a full-time staff that, 3 other staff members that make up that team. So I think having that advisement, that's why I think the state doesn't want cities that do not have a full-time staff to get into this, because they want us to have that collaborative resource of the purchasing office. And certainly, we have our staff not only has certifications, but they do training, and they bring that back. And so I think that resource, from what I see, is our departments appreciate that resource, and they don't hesitate to ask our purchasing staff questions, even if it's not necessarily required.
That's a great point. And Brian sort of joked when he presented his budget about his org chart, but there are 4 full-time professionals that are working on it. But they've also cultivated what they call departmental purchasing agents, right, throughout all the departments. So he's built, and his team has built a network that they instill these professional purchasing values and guidance to those departments too. So it's really taken very seriously. And Christine makes a great point. It's not just for any city, it's for cities that have taken the extra measures to professionalize and put the right people in place and the right systems in place. And I feel like we are a great example of that. And we've earned that authority, the ability to have that and have that efficiency built into our process.
Any other questions? Then I will entertain a motion for ordinance 2022-20, an ordinance to increase from 25,000 to 50,000 threshold over which public advertisement and sealed bid competitive bids are required. Anyone want to make that motion?
I would recommend to the board.
Proper motion or a second?
Second, sir.
Let's do a roll call vote on that. Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
And Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Let's go to item 6 then. Item 6 is a discussion of draft resolution 2022-40, a resolution to rescind certain resolutions and granting new authority for the city administrator.
I'll start because it deals with the authority you've granted this position. And this, like what happened about 11 years ago, as the state updated that bid authority, we did
Thank you.
mirror that with city administrator authority. So we're recommending that we do that, but we're also looking at, over time, we've had multiple resolutions of the board, most of them several years ago, but that granted certain specific authority to the administrator. This kind of replaces those and consolidates those into one resolution, as well as sort of updating it, modernizing it with that dollar amount. And there are a couple other additional recommendations that came from staff that we've integrated into a draft resolution that we are glad to walk through with you and really get your guidance on your comfort level of this assignment of authority. Of course, as I referenced before, we report whenever we use this authority back to you and back to the public so that you can see how it's being used on your behalf. So Shauna drafted this with the help of our team. I'll let her speak to it.
As I'm sitting here, I realized I left out one very important part, so I'm going to have to fix that when we bring it back to BOMA. And that is that if Eric is allowed authority to enter into contracts, he'd be allowed the authority to terminate them if we find that there's cause. But that's something that was really important for us.
You may remember we had a contractor on mowing services
Yes.
that clearly missed the mark in terms of performance, and even after notice continued to fail, and we needed to terminate. And we found that we needed to bring that all the way back to you, and that cost us time and the ability to move on to the next bidder and to be in a better position to get that service replaced by a more capable provider. So it makes sense, and something we identified as we went through that. So that would be a good addition to your list.
Is that going to be under number 2? Yeah.
It'll probably be a new number 3, and then the
Okay.
rest of them will be numbered in that way. So The resolutions in section 1 are being rescinded, but they are restated throughout section 2, and pretty much their entirety, or at least for the purpose of which they were created originally. So, but one is new, which is execute parkland impact fee agreements that are fee only, because there's a formula that we use. There's really no discretion on how that's going to work, but it would, I think, facilitate quicker responses. Sometimes we're waiting on that fee number right up until the board meeting, and if Eric just had the authority to sign them, it would just make the process a little bit smoother. The second, obviously, is what we talked about just a second ago. Right now, Eric has authority to execute contracts and agreements 25,000 and under. But since keeping it in line with the state law, we think 50,000 makes sense, and it would also open up your agendas, I think, a little bit more freely. Again, you see those contracts; they're going to be items approved on behalf. There will be no surprises to those. Executing grant applications, he already has that authority. We're just restating it in this. As Eric said, sometimes we're all like, well, what authority does he have? Which resolution number was that? So this puts it kind of all in one document.
And I want to clarify on that too. This is the application for the grant. The ultimate grant agreement will come to you to
Right.
approve. Okay, so this just helps us be efficient in getting in, meeting deadlines, getting in the application, and then when it comes down to actually executing a grant agreement and, formalizing it, you all are in the loop on that final decision.
Right. Well, unless it's 50,000 or less.
Right, right,
But if it's anything more than that, or if the matching is 50,000 or less.
yes.
And so number 4, we already have this authority, and it's usually seen through the budget, but it's overfilling positions when we know employment, either an employee is going to leave due to resigning or retirement, something like that, and we know that they have a wealth of knowledge, and we need to overfill those positions for a period of time. This would allow Eric to do that. Generally, it's only 1 per department every so often, but in fire, we limited it to 5 in fire and 5 in police.
And these are for the entry-level positions. What we have seen is we go through a application and testing and physical qualifications process, and often we may only have, say, 4 or 5 openings, but we find 8 great candidates. And we know just the churn of life, we will need those vacancies at some point, so we've gone ahead and you've given the authority to overhire up to 5, and that's worked really well for us because we can capitalize on when we've found good candidates for those frontline positions.
And finally, the last is amending the organizational chart so long as they're budget neutral. The organizational charts are part of the budget, which requires technically 3 readings and a public hearing. But if it's budget neutral and all you're doing is moving who someone reports to, that's really administrative and not necessarily a financial decision. So that really helps Eric make some strategic moves without having to go back to the board. And then obviously 3 readings takes a bit of time. So that's all. If there's anything else that you can think of that would make your agendas better or quicker, we're also interested in
And
that.
that's kind of one of the things I ask staff is think of the things that we put on an agenda that we never talk about because they're just so straightforward. As one way to think about it.
So I had one quick question on section 2, number 2. And I'm in agreement with moving from 25 to 50. That makes sense in alignment with what we just did. Is there any need to include anything about duration, even though it's going to be less than $50,000?
It's the whole contract regardless of year. So if
Okay.
it's a 3-year contract, $50,000 per year, then that's over the authority. It's the whole contract
Okay.
completely.
And you'll see us bring an amendment back to you that might be only $10,000, but it's because it's putting us over the threshold.
Right.
Gotcha.
So we are very sensitive to that, to
Good.
make sure we stay in line with it overall.
Okay.
So if you did the 50 for 3 years, that'd have to come to the board.
If it's 50,000 per year, yes.
3
You're gonna see
years.
it, yeah.
If it's 50,000 for the whole 3 years, then no.
No.
It's really that
That's simple.
dollar
But once
amount.
if we amended it and brought it, then you'd see it. You'd see it.
You're
Even
right.
though I had executed the original, if it took us over the threshold, you would then approve it.
So with those types of contracts, would we consider that to be in that non-controversial agenda items for updates, or is that just considered operations?
We would typically bring those to, if it's an amendment that takes us over the limit, we would bring it through either this
Right.
committee or CIP committee typically.
But if it's not?
And then if the committee approves it unanimously, we put it on consent. It just-
Otherwise, they're items approved on behalf. So that's
Yeah.
that whole list of things. Eric, that's the authority you've granted.
Okay.
And that's my
executed.
accountability back to you, is here's how I've used the authority you've granted over the last time period.
And that's how we're being transparent to the public then? Okay.
That's right.
Right.
Any other questions from the
I'll add
committee?
one more thing I
Okay.
thought of
Yeah.
as Shauna was thinking, talking this through. And we sort of addressed this in the HR manual discussion, but we did provide for the ability of the city administrator to make some adjustments to the policies there.
That's in the HR manual.
We'd have to, would we want to reiterate that here or not, just
I mean,
for
it's
clarity?
already in there. We could just say pursuant to the HR manual. That's like the police officer general orders. The fire department have their own special rules. Some departments are, like what you have to wear, what your, hours of work, those kind of things.
Mm-hmm. I know we did it there, I just didn't know if we'd want to capture it in this resolution or not.
I mean, it wouldn't hurt to put it in
Something for
here.
us to think about. Again, it's like, it already exists, but it's you can find it all in one place.
So if we go ahead, sorry, if we're going to add the enter and terminate section and then the part, Eric, that you just referenced, does this have to be voted on and approved here? So do we have to wait on that, or can we just go ahead and have
I
a-
think you can recommend it as we've kind of discussed. I'll make those
And we can
changes.
make the tweaks before it goes to the board.
And it's going to work session.
Well, that was going to be my other question for you. Since it's a full board authority, I would suggest we bring it to work session on the 28th with your recommendation, but I'd like the whole board to engage in it. And I don't know if you feel the same way about what Brian talked you through on the public advertisement sealed bid threshold as well, if we bring both those, just because they are sort of a grant of authority. I'm good either way, but sometimes it's good to have the whole board make sure they understand the authority they're changing or granting to your professional staff.
And I'm not as concerned about, I don't know if there's a way to specify contract types. I don't want to get too specific, but obviously, I support this, obviously. I think there's a lot, 50,000, that can encompass quite a lot of different types of contracts. And
Yeah.
I know, I trust Eric is going to bring anything that we would be concerned about, but it's kind of just setting a policy and a precedent for
Yeah.
future. And I don't know if there's a way, I wouldn't.
Well, I would just say
begin to
this.
know the difference of what types of contracts could be under 50, but, I mean, that's a pretty broad, any contract, I mean, I don't know.
When it's a sticky situation, possibly a political situation, Eric has a good feel on it. There are times when an item might be less than 25,000, but he feels that you need to see it.
Yeah.
So it's within his authority, but he doesn't have to execute
Yeah,
it.
just because you have the authority doesn't mean you always use it. There are times I've brought stuff that are unearned because I know you're interested. If there are specific types that come to mind, please let us know. That helps me be extra sensitive to it. I don't know if there's
We haven't had any issues.
specific categories that come up. We're glad to consider that. or
Nothing comes
factor
to
that in.
mind, I'm
Yeah.
just thinking
Right.
outside, just
Yeah.
trying to think.
Of
There
the
can be
ones that
things
have
that-
been approved as an item on behalf, we haven't had an issue, but we've had a few that Eric's put on for vote just because he felt that you needed to see it.
For transparency.
Yeah.
Or public discussion.
Yeah.
The contract with Winrow Phillips, theoretically,
I could.
Eric could
Yeah.
have approved that without ever bringing it to the board.
But you should know who your lobbyist is. I
Yeah.
mean, that's kind of an important decision, right?
Yeah. and-
Brian, did you want to add something?
May I just interject something? And Shauna, I'm sorry that I didn't have a chance to meet with you about this prior, but when I heard you talking about making some tweaks before it comes to the work session, I'd like to plant a seed, may I put it that way, of one of the resolutions that's referenced is 2015-20. That resolution is a little peculiar in that it grants to the city administrator authority, delegates authority to execute contracts even above the then 25,000 threshold, now presumably would be 50,000, even if it's above that amount, but if it otherwise satisfies the city policy. And the reason I had brought this to the board in 2015 was we use the statewide contract for salt for, on the hottest day of the year, we're talking about spreading salt on the roads for de-icing the roads.
It's going to
And
matter in 6 months.
It's, the statewide contract has been fully vetted. It's gone through the competitive process. We have a contractor supplier at our disposal upon our request, and the dollar amounts are well over the procurement thresholds. We spend probably well, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm thinking that it's north of $100,000 a year on salt. And so that was the reason I recall saying to my colleagues, gosh, the board surely doesn't want us to be bringing a contract with a vendor where the city didn't establish which vendor was being selected. That was done by the state. And so.
And we're allowed to.
And we're
piggyback
allowed to
off of
use the
basic-
statewide
yeah.
contracts as a local government. It's a wonderful tool in our toolkit for procurements. So I guess I would like to entertain out loud or brainstorm out loud with Shauna and Eric and Christine, the idea either of withdrawing 2015-20 from the list of resolutions that are being rescinded, and let us handle that separately, because I think it deserves careful consideration of those contracts that are over the bid threshold.
We can either withdraw it, or we can just add some language under paragraph 2 that says, or purchases procured under an approved statewide contract. Unless you want more language than
Like
that,
a
and then
number
we can.
6, a new number 6 that
Yep.
encompasses what was there.
Or I can copy and paste that.
May we get together and discuss?
You guys, yeah.
Yep.
Don't want to vote on salt, though.
Yeah. When you need it, get it, yeah.
Popsicles,
Go ahead and
maybe.
do that for us, Eric.
Yeah, and Eric, to your point a moment ago, I would be in support as we work through this to bring both to the work session at the end of the month.
Okay, glad to do it.
With that entitlement and the other edits.
Any other questions or comments on this particular item? Then if not, I'll entertain a motion to approve and recommend to the work session. Do you have a specific date?
I think the 28th.
Yes,
28th?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Motion to recommend.
To the work session, to approve from the committee and
Approve from the
send to the
committee
work session.
for the
on-
28th.
On June 28th.
Including the various items we've discussed here
Correct.
that are on the record.
Correct. Is there a second? Let's do a roll call vote. Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Let's go to item 8 then, consideration of resolution 2022 dash.
Can we go to 7?
I'm sorry, that mark, okay. Consideration of resolution 2022-41 resolution adopting a revised purchasing policy for the city of Franklin, procurements not pertaining to new construction. You're up again. All right.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. I'm still Brian Wilcox, and I'm still
Just in a different chair.
glad to be your purchasing manager. Staff recommends several changes to the purchasing policy for city procurements not pertaining to new construction. Namely, to update the purchasing policy to reflect the new $50,000 threshold over which public advertisement and sealed competitive bids or proposals are required for non-emergency, non-proprietary purchases as established by ordinance 22-20. Now, of course, that assumes that the board chooses to adopt ordinance 2022-20. Secondly, to update the purchasing policy to reflect the new $20,000 threshold over which 3 quotes are required for purchases. Thirdly, to clarify that the 3 quotes for purchases in the 3-quote range are to be from different suppliers and service providers. And finally, to otherwise update the policy. In your packet is a redline version of the revised policy as proposed, which is marked to show all the recommended changes to the text of the policy. And staff recommends that the committee recommend passage of this resolution. Thank you.
And thank you, it's always good to have the marked changes there instead of trying to go through.
Any questions or comments, O'Brien? Any comments, Eric, Christine? Okay. Then I'll entertain a motion to approve and forward to the full board.
Mr. Chair,
Resolution 2022-41.
Mr. Chair, I'll make said motion to move this to the work session to the full board.
Proper motion to a second.
Second.
Then let's do a roll call vote. Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes on that. Okay.
Just a point of clarification, did you mean to say the work session? Or may this go straight to the full board, a voting meeting?
Does this need to go through the work session?
This is the purchasing policy.
And the
Could you do it all
the reason why is, I thought it needed to because it referenced 2022-20.
So on that point, which is an excellent point, our plan is to hold the resolution until the meeting of the board at which you are considering the ordinance on second reading. Because the ordinance requires 2 readings, it'll come to you first on June 28, and then second reading would be July 14. And so we would bring the purchasing policy resolution to that July 14 full board meeting because it's coming from the Budget and Finance. However, I think Eric and Christine would welcome you.
We can do it either way. They kind of go together, especially item 5 and item 7.
I think it could be
Or 6.
presented at the work session
Sure,
on the
okay.
28th, just as a awareness.
Very good.
And then it would be voted upon after the previous was approved.
Perfect.
All right.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
Absolutely.
All right. Any other clarifications? Then let's go to item 8. Since consideration of resolution 2022-42, resolution adopting a revised vendor protest procedure for City of Franklin procurement not pertaining to new construction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Knock on wood, the protest procedure is something that we don't have to reference very often. And we're grateful for that. It's always a gulp when you have a vendor that wants to file a protest or decides to file a protest. And we alert our colleagues and off we go, trying to figure out what went wrong, if something went wrong. But fortunately, it doesn't come up very often. We do, however, from time to time, review it and make sure that it reflects our needs as they evolve over time. So staff is recommending the protest procedure be further revised in 4 ways. First, to update the threshold, the $50,000 threshold, because the protest policy is applicable to the sealed bid process. It has to necessarily reference what that sealed bid threshold is. And so the first update would be to what the value of the sealed bid threshold is. Secondly, and this is more of a substantive change, rather than having a panel of staff members hear appeals of purchasing manager decisions, we are recommending that the city administrator consider those appeals. Thirdly, to clarify deadlines for submitting and acting on protests and appeals of purchasing manager decisions. And then finally, to otherwise update the policy. In my haste of preparing the agenda packet, I inadvertently omitted the red line version from the electronic packet. It'll be in the packet that goes to the full board. But today you do have a hard copy of the red line version of the revised vendor protest procedure. I apologize for my oversight. And that red line version has marked all the recommended changes to the text, but I've just summarized, as I just summarized. So staff recommends approval, staff recommends the committee recommend approval of Resolution 2022-42. Thank you.
Any questions of Brian from staff, from the committee?
I have 2 questions.
All right.
Is this going to move forward for, as we look at this one, since this one also references the 2022-20, would this also move forward on July 14th?
That's when it would be brought to the full board.
Good.
And I defer to you as to whether you wish to have it come to the work session on June 28th. We might as well handle both the purchasing policy and the protest procedure in lockstep.
Okay.
It might keep me from getting confused, so.
And that's actually what I was going to ask and recommend.
Great.
Yep. And then the other question that I had, it was more for Eric and Brian, Mr. Wilcox, welcome to answer, but when we look at the appeal process and how often does this really occur as we're looking at, bullet point number 2?
I hope never.
Okay.
But certainly, this is how it will certainly happen now.
And I will say, I'm a little, I don't want to jinx myself either, because I'm really, I hope this is fake or I can knock on something, but I've been with the city 5.5 years now and supported the purchasing office during my entire time. And something that we've actually not had anything come to the committee. However, we do have questions from time to time. And certainly in the role that I play in supporting purchasing, I work very closely with Brian and his staff so that anytime that there either are questions, certainly we regularly review what's coming through purchasing. I'm probably a little bit more involved than perhaps someone who would typically sit on on a review panel who's never seen anything before, because really my role is to help the purchasing office and support them in any way I can. So, certainly I have been, there's been a couple of times where there have been questions and we've worked together and kind of been a sounding board for one another. But this would probably allow a hearing that doesn't have someone who is routinely involved with supporting the purchasing office and giving guidance in the role that I do have. So there are I don't want to say that I know I'm talking about something that we hope that doesn't happen too frequently, but it's not a regular occurrence that this panel has been formed. But we do on occasion have questions, and we've been able to work through those when a potential vendor maybe is a little unhappy with an outcome.
I would add to those answers that 2 points of clarification occur to me. But first, to your question about how often does this come up, the last time I recall the appeal panel convening was prior to Christine coming to the city. You may recall something that I'm forgetting, but the one that I recall, her predecessor, Russ Truhl, chaired the appeal panel, and they met and they discussed it, and then he wrote a decision, and off we went. And in fact, as I think about it, that's the only time I can recall the appeal panel ever meeting since 2004 when I came on board. The 2 points of clarification I wish to make are, first, the current arrangement is a panel of 3 staff of the city. It is, and we're talking about bids as opposed to proposals. And the second clarification has to do with proposals. But still on bids, the 3 staff on the panel are assistant city administrators and the department head of the requisitioning department for that purchase that's being protested. So the replacement of that panel with Eric as the city administrator is still being handled at the administrative level. It's just that instead of a panel of 3, it's focused on one person and intentionally slightly removed from the day-to-day operations of the purchasing office, which was what Christine is alluding to in her close relationship and support of the purchasing office. The second clarification is that the state law prescribes, gives no option to local governments about how to handle protests involving requests for proposals and the subsequent proposals that come in. You know that in the world of purchasing, the general public thinks of the competitive process as all bids. Well, in strictly speaking, you have bids where you issue specifications and price wins as long as they meet specifications. Price is really the only criteria. And then you have a completely separate category, a request for proposals, where price is a factor, but only one of 4 or 5 factors. And in fact, Jessica's presentation earlier this afternoon on the utility bill printing is a good example of a request for proposals where there were 4 or 5 or 6 selection criteria, including price. In the case of proposals, protests must come straight to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, to the governing body. That's not a staff choice. We probably would have preferred to keep you out of that because it seems to us to be a poor use of your time, but we don't have the latitude to decide that. So you'll see that in the purchasing policy, and this is not being changed by the recommendation in front of you, that it has been and will continue to be that if protests should surface related to a request for proposals, that will need to be considered by the full Board of Mayor and Aldermen.
Any other questions of Brian, Christine, or Eric? If not, then I'll entertain a motion to approve and send to the full board, or do you need to go to the workshop? You need to follow what the other one's doing, okay.
So,
that's-
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion
Purchase
to
ignited.
to recommend the resolution to the full board, mayor and aldermen for vote on July the 14th, and to have this presented for awareness at the work session on June the 28th.
Proper motions or a second?
Second.
Let's do a roll call vote. Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Vote yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes
Now,
yes.
let me ask you just a minute, though. It's July the 14th? That's not.
It's actually July 12th.
July
July
12th.
12th, yes.
So we'll make an amendment to that date reference.
Every time you said the 14th, we know you.
I thought that you said the 14th. I was following your lead.
If I did, I didn't. I misspoke. Yeah, we got it.
We'll make, that'll be a city administrator internal decision.
Otherwise, I'll be sitting here by
You're not
myself.
appealing that?
Yeah, we'll let you practice
We know what
on
you
that
meant,
one,
yeah.
all right? Okay, item 9, financial report for third quarter of FY 2022. Mike, you're up again.
Yes. From the executive summary on page 1, I will start with the top story. The general fund at the end of March is at its highest one-year surplus position ever. In comparison, last year, we were at $10 million of a surplus position. Even though in 2022, we have $6 million more in expenditures, we actually have 14 million more in local sales tax, which combines to make the $18 million surplus. And the primary driver of this surplus is local sales tax. The first 9 months, we're averaging 4.7 million, whereas last year, we were averaging 3.5 million per month. And this will likely be the surplus's high point because we're anticipating certain items in the fourth quarter. There were amendments given to the board back on Tuesday that we're anticipating, if passage on third reading, is a transfer to capital projects fund of 5.1 million in the fourth quarter, a transfer to the new capital vehicles fund of 3.2 million, an additional contribution to the closed pension fund of 1.5 million, and a transfer to street aid of 1 million. And in addition, there will be normal activity in the fourth quarter, which will include the fourth quarter closed pension contribution, as well as an additional payroll. Other good news in the quarterly reports is that hotel and motel taxes are double the entire last year. The transit fund is likely not to maybe need the additional 750,000 that you heard back on Tuesday that we put in there just in case, because we have been noticing that the grant receipts have been coming in as expected. So we anticipate that might not have a need for that amount. And last, and it's something that we notice when we're seeing the reports, if you look at interest income and funds that have investments, they show as a negative interest income. And the reason that is, it's because it's a valuation as if the city were going to sell the investments. And what happens is we hold them to maturity, so we are actually earning positive interest. It's just that's the way accounting needs us to present it. Was there anything else, Christine, you wanted us to add to quarterly reports?
No, I did ask Mike to just give a little commentary on the mark-to-market on the investment. Certainly, this is something Eric and I have even been discussing lately, is certainly as the Federal Reserve has been increasing interest rates, we've been doing quite a bit of investing in our portfolio, and we actually settle an investment tomorrow. We'll probably do one more at the end of this month when sales tax comes in for the month of June. And so while we have consistently invested, and we did invest for the little bit of the duration when we were having to invest at 25 basis points and 50 basis points. With our investment tomorrow, we actually break the 1% on our investment portfolio, but it had actually got down to 70 basis points back in January. And so, the discipline of investing routinely and having, we actually have a maturity, at least one a month for the next almost 3 years. So every month we have a maturity, and we see where the market is, and certainly we look at what our cash flow needs are and do a reinvestment if that's the appropriate thing to do. But we do certainly have some shorter term investments that, while we will not incur losses because we do not need to sell them early for cash flow purposes, the mark-to-market on those is less than the par amount. So I did ask Mike to include that, both as footnotes in the document, and then mention that this time. But certainly breaking the 1% investment yield is up that it doesn't sound like a big deal, but truly that annual coupon income at 1% is up to about $1.6 million of real revenue. That's actually really real cash. So there is a gain, and we'll be certainly we were very cautious with our interest income projections for the new budget, because back in January and February it did not look so rosy. So that's something that we may we certainly just didn't know in January how quickly investments in shorter-term treasuries would rise. Unfortunately, they're rising because the Federal Reserve believes it needs to do something significant to achieve what they want to achieve. But it is pretty monumental what we're seeing on the increases in treasuries.
Any questions on any of the items that Mike went over? I do have one, and hopefully I'm on the right track. We have a certain percentage in the reserves based upon the yearly operating budget. So is the 18 million against the, what is it, 40%? Something a little less?
Well, I mean, it would be calculated out, but yes, I mean, it would go into the
So we're doing
formula to
40%
determine,
of the
yes.
90 million.
Well, once we close the books,
Yeah.
and as Mike was saying, we actually
Okay.
have expenses that were higher in fiscal '22. So once we pay all the bills for '22, we'll have a little different threshold on where that 40% needs to be for our operating reserve, because our expenses did rise in '22. But yes, once we close the books, pay all the bills, get all the revenues in, there at the end of August, we'll be able to see what that the 40% operating
It may not be
reserve.
40, maybe it's close to it.
We're just talking about for this current year. We're not talking about the
Yeah,
reserve.
that's it. This is
that we-
just for the current
Yeah,
year.
we're just not talking about the reserve that we've already got in there.
But we do recalculate that at the end of the fiscal
Yeah.
year, once
Understand.
everything is
Exactly.
closed, and recalibrate where those percentages are against the most recent, audited expenses for the general fund.
Any other questions or comments? Then let's go to item 10, the monthly reports. And I don't see Margaret here.
No, she is kind of under the weather, so
Uh-huh.
I guess I'm going to fill in for her.
Okay.
But she told me she trusts Mike. She
Yeah.
said, she's trusted Mike because she's done such a great job, but she's going to make sure he does
I'm
it.
sure she's watching and she'll give Mike some feedback.
I better do well. Well, the three highlights that Margaret would give is she would let you know this is the 12th consecutive month that local sales tax has been over 4 million. Gasoline taxes are up 15% over last year and 20% over budget. And maybe the last item for monthly reports, the conference center did well in April of 2022. The city received its first 6-digit profit, $100,000, since October of 2018. So a very good month.
Yeah, I happened to see the manager of the Marriott and the Conference Center on Tuesday morning, and he was saying how strong
Yeah.
this month has been as well. So
Exactly.
they've really seen an uptick on both the hotel side, but also on the Conference Center side. So he was feeling very good. He had a big smile on his face, so that was good to see.
Any other questions or comments? Mayor?
I've been silent the entire meeting and I will remain.
Then let's make that silent. And let's do an adjournment then. All in favor would,
May I, Mr. Chair, just mention
yeah.
two things very quickly. The schedule is that we are taking July off, if that is still the schedule for the committee, so that we will get back together on August the 11th, if that is still your
You all
intention.
have earned your summer break.
And the second meeting of the board is off also?
Yeah, and also off in July.
Yeah, we only have one July bone.
One
meeting.
July
Yeah.
meeting, okay.
July
But-
12th.
But my,
I'll be here for everybody.
Yeah, we do.
but I do promise that as staff, we are going to be working on July reports, and I'm sure the city administrator will be happy to send that to you, even though the committee does take a break. So we will let you know the monthly reports, even in the absence of a meeting.
Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, sir.
Proper motion to a second.
When?
All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned.
She loved